Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Hopefully that works. Yes, and now I have to put it on full screen. Do you see something? Yes? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for the invitation. I could, of course, insult Russia the next 2 hours, but I will rather talk about, about urbanism today. I know you have very difficult times there. We heard it as well here in Switzerland. But yes, we will talk about urbanism. My name is Han van der Wetering. I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I live already since 20 years or over 20 years in Zurich, where I have my, my own office. We won the Swiss Urbanism Award. That's not so difficult because there are not so many good urbanists in Switzerland. But I will tell you a little bit about what I think is urbanism about. The title is a little bit boring, new urbanism. If you add new to it, then it sounds more interesting. But it's, I think it's important to show a little bit what opportunities there are and what inspiration there is for future Ukrainian urban development. Because you're a young audience, I would like to start a little bit about what urbanism is about, what the position is between the disciplines, and what I think personally what good urbanism is about. Then to make you understand better, I want to tell a short story, a history about the development of urbanism. I think it still works, huh? We're still online, huh? Yeah. And then I want to talk about Ukraine, especially. So what is in Ukraine? Yes. So what is good urbanism about? And first, maybe what is urbanism? And I looked it up in Wikipedia. It's about the design and functioning of the built environment. But the rest I wrote, it's like something personal, what I think is important. So it's first of all, if you talk about design, it's about aesthetics. So about beauty, about identity, if you feel comfortable. And if you talk about aesthetics or beauty in urbanism way, it's, for instance, a question about spatial proportions, how high are buildings, how broad are the streets. It's about architecture, as you see on these pictures. But it's also about well-being, because if you talk about urbanism, it's where the people live, where people work. So it's about comfort, if you feel safe. It's human scale. There are lots of gender questions also if you're talking about well-being. Then there's the question of socio-economics. So you have to build houses, of course, huh? But not only houses, you need also places to work. You need possibilities for growth and development. And there are, of course, also all these technical aspects, like you need infrastructure, like roads, tram lines, supply, like electricity, for instance. Of course, schools, sport facilities. There are also themes like urban physics, especially if you talk about climate change today. But it was already always been part of urbanism, like wind, shade, light, etc. And I just found some pictures about the Rozanivka district in Kiev. It's a very beautiful housing district, which still works quite well. And all these aspects were just talked about, they were integrated in this district. So they had, I don't know if you see my cursor, but they constructed these canals, and that they are very beautiful, of course. They are part of the identity of this district. But you see also it's very green. So for urban climate, it's something very positive. And even some kind of painter made a painting for it, so that already shows that obviously it's a beautiful beautiful district. But you see here, it's very diverse. There are lots of aspects if you were talking about urbanism. Of course, urbanism, it's teamwork. I never work alone. It's always in a team with different people, different disciplines. Maybe to explain a little bit what urbanism is about, it's maybe easy to talk about disciplines which are close to urbanism. For instance, architecture. I think you know a little bit what architecture is about. That's easy to understand. That's about the design of a building, more like an object, and the focus is on qualities. That's what design is about. And of course, appropriate solutions. So specific solutions for a building. You see here, for instance, in this picture to the left, that's the Hotel Salute design contest project. And the original plan today, it's near the Children's Palace in Kiev. And it's only 6 or 7 stories, but originally it was higher. But it's typical architecture, so specific building, specific design, and always 3-dimensional. So you always have a model, for instance, to show it. And then on the other side, you have city planning or zoning. And this is the general plan of Kiev. It's a legal instrument. It's about quantities. So you define, can I build 6 stories or 5 stories, what densities, how much you can build on in these areas. It's of course a larger scale. It's about a whole city or just a district. There are lots about regulations, restrictions, and it's 2-dimensional, as you see. It's really only a plan. And urbanism is really something in between. It's in one hand, it's also a larger scale. It's not one building, one object like architecture. There are more buildings or a whole district or even a whole city. And at the same time, the focus is also on qualities. It's about appropriate solutions for this area, for this city. And you see here a picture that was also the design competition for the city center of Kiev when it was destroyed 70 years ago by Nazi Germany. They organized a contest, and you see also here in this picture, it's 3-dimensional and it's a more larger scale. And so that shows a little bit the position between the disciplines. And as I told you, it's always teamwork. So or it's even more than teamwork, because if I work, for instance, with architects and with traffic engineers, they usually don't understand each other. So there are lots of conflicts always between these two, and then I have to moderate and facilitate and tell, no, that's a good idea, or that's not a good idea. So you're also kind of facilitator. When we start with an urbanism project, we always start with the open space, with the public or open space. That's the most important thing to start with. That's how we do it. So we don't start with the buildings, as lots of others might do it, but we start with the public space. And here we see a picture of, I show you slides, and I always noted the book where it comes from. And these books are like the standard urbanism books. So when you have time, sometimes when you really start to study urbanism, these are really interesting books. That's theory also, but also, they show a little bit what urbanism is about. So this is a picture from the book Design of Cities from 1974. So already an old book, but it's a standard book that all urbanists know, by Edmund Bacon. And he made a plan for the city center of Philadelphia. And you see here, it's not about buildings, but about spaces which are connected, which are coherent, so that you can very well orientate in the city, and that everything is linked. And that, yes, I think this linking of different areas in the city is very important. So we start always with this kind of images. The other thing which I think is important is that urbanism, and that makes it also very interesting, urbanism is about a combination of aesthetics and functionality. And this picture is also an old picture from Berlage from the urban extension of Amsterdam. It's a picture, a plan made in 1914, so already over 100 years old. And I think it's quite interesting. It's also, again, three-dimensional. It always should be three-dimensional. But you see also that it's about functionality. So you see like tram lines here, you see streets, you even see a harbor here. But you see also qualities. So there are streets, there are squares, there are special buildings, landmarks. There are streets with trees. There are, he already tells about the form of the roofs, about the ground floor spaces. So everything, it's an integral way of planning, you can say. It's like everything, and that makes it also very interesting. Maybe another aspect of urbanism is that it's about different scales. And so as soon as you have a plan, for instance, this is a project we made ourselves. I didn't find a good historic example. It's a plan we made for St. Gallen. It's a small city in the eastern part of Switzerland. And there, the city lies in a valley. And there was the idea of how can we improve the mobility and transport and urban development. And we had the idea of creating like these I wrote it here, strong urban axes. So like roads which are very beautiful, but where there's traffic, but also urban development. And that was also translated to the regional scale, because there it was also about how do we improve the functioning of the region. And then of course it was integrated. You see here in a regional scale, you see exactly these strong urban axes, which we had here for the city. You see them also on the larger plan, but we also already made zooms to be sure that it's really possible what we think. So you see here a plan which more in detail. So it's about how many lanes we need for the traffic, can we plant trees, what densities we can have, etc. So there's always these different scales, which makes it also very interesting to work with. Yes, maybe one picture which really shows something, what is so important, or so why urbanism is so important. So we have these different disciplines, and if you have different disciplines, you have another way of thinking. So you're also always thinking, yes, okay, I have to solve the traffic problems, but I also have to help the architect. And this is also from a book by Eugène Hénard, when Paris was transformed after with all these boulevards. He was the engineer, the city engineer of Paris. And you see here an image, it's quite interesting. So you can, of course, in this, you see here to the left, you see this picture of a corner of a house, very boring. It's not really an interesting corner. And he says, yes, this is a little bit boring. So why don't we make it more beautiful? You can make, like here on the right, you can make something which is really a nice entrance. It's very visible. Edges of buildings are always very visible because it's close to a crossing. And if we make it more beautiful, we can make also the situation for the traffic more secure. You see here on this image below, you see here two couches with horses, of course, at that time. And you see here, if you cut like this building, you can have, if you cut this building like this, you have a better view. Yeah? So it's for the security, it's much better because this person here can see the other person here. But it's also for pedestrians. There's all these small arrows here for pedestrians. You have a way you can walk, have a shortcut to the edge, so you can profit also for the traffic. And that's very interesting. It's also an urbanist who should come with this idea, because if you ask an architect and he shows you his building, and you say, let's cut this this edge, let's cut it, then he's not convinced. So you always have to try to find different ways to combine things, and these pictures show that you can have something more beautiful, but also more functional. It's for the traffic, it's more functional. For the architecture, it's more beautiful. Urbanism is also about robustness. It's maybe a German word, I don't know. It's about resilience, you can say. And I think it's also yes, also a picture from a famous book, The City Shaped by Spiro Kostov. It shows the city center, old city center of Verona. And you see here, it was a Roman city. You see here also the old arena, Roman arena. But you see also this old Roman grid here. You see here these old streets. And this Roman grid, it exists already over 2,000 years, and it still exists. So that means this, obviously this form, urban form, was very resilient or very robust. It survived 2,000 years. And that shows also a little bit, so urbanism is not like it's not about futurism, but it's more about making things which can stand for long and which function well during a long time. All these buildings which you see here, they're not Roman anymore. They were constructed in the Middle Ages. Only the arena is still from the Roman times. Yes, urbanism. It's not about really the future like science fiction, but it's about visions. But they should be courageous. And you see here an image we made for city of Emmen, near in the central part of Switzerland. And you see here also, which is something which is important as well. You always need to work with images. So not boring technical plans, but you should show images so that you can convince people. If you have a vision, you have to convince people that this is the way the city should develop. And of course, urbanism, it's also about politics, because it affects all people. So it's also about dialogue. So you have to talk a lot with people, and we work a lot with models, because we like also to construct them, to play with them. And you see our model we constructed in Hamburg, in Germany. It's not a beautiful model, but it was also, we wanted it not to be too beautiful, that people can also work with it. So we invited lots of people. We showed what our ideas were in this part of the city of Hamburg. And it was really a good dialogue, and people understood very well with the model what was meant, how high are buildings, where are green spaces, how is it connected. And I think that's also an important aspect of urbanism. And yes, I can also tell you that urbanism is very versatile, and that's also why I personally like it so much. It's not boring, it's never boring. I don't understand why people are getting doctors or bus drivers. Urbanism is the most interesting job you can have. And you see here these are some projects we are working on or we worked on. And you see here, it's really everything. I showed you lots of projects from cities, like here this is also the central station for Zurich, where we are working on. But you see also small villages. So don't forget the villages as well. They need help as well. I heard it also in Ukraine. But it's also large scale. You have like regions. This is Cologne, Bonn, 4 million inhabitants. So we're working on very large scale projects, which you see already in this design for the villages in Schaffhausen. It's also about architecture. And it's not only about housing, but it's also about business districts in small villages and large cities, etc. So it's really very, very broad, and that makes it very interesting. Now I want to show you a little bit history. So how did the cities, how did they grow, and why we plan like we plan today? And I start not at the Greeks or the Romans, but I start in the Middle Ages. And you see here again pictures from an interesting book by Benevolo. This is also a book which all urbanists know, History of the City. And you see here in the same scale different city centers of middle-aged cities. And you see they almost have the same dimension. It's 1 to 2 kilometers. So by foot you can walk, you can reach everything. And at that time, in the Middle Ages, everything was combined. So working and housing, it was one house where you worked and where you slept. So we're very compact. Then I jump to the Renaissance, or maybe also to the industrialization. And that was the time of boulevards. The cities were growing. The economic power was growing very fast. And that was the time also where this integral planning was very important, this idea of synergies. And this is also another book, which is quite interesting if you like to read things. This is The City as a Work of Art by Donald Olson. And he wrote, for instance, about these boulevards in Paris, which were constructed in the 19th century. That the boulevard is a combination of a park and a street. So it's for traffic, but it's also for meeting, for living, etc. So it's not so that a boulevard is just a street, but it's also a place to live, to meet people, to rest. You see your terraces. So that was in that time, this integral thinking was very important. You see here another example by Cerda, Barcelona. He won also a contest for the extension of the city over 100 years ago, and he made these small sketches you see here. And if you have a road crossing, for instance, you can do it like this. You see in this small sketch on the left. But that's a little bit boring. Then you only have a boring crossing. So he proposed, if you cut these edges or make like larger edges, or maybe on the other side, or you make a square, then a crossing, a simple street crossing, can get much more interesting. It's the same thing I saw. I talked about in the other example, but it shows a little bit this integral thinking and have integral solutions which help different problems to solve different problems. That was at that time very important. Another thing which was important at that time, this is a picture of Antwerp in Belgium. It's like this. I like this very much. This harmony of diversity. So you have like a certain harmony. You have like buildings on a row, so you have one street. It's very coherent, but it's very diverse. You see here, you see here different buildings, different building heights. It's very diverse. You can have even like these old kind of buildings, villas on the streets, but it's something as a whole. So it belongs together. And that was also in that time, this human scale was important. Now I make a jump to the modern urbanism that was started before the Second World War, but most projects realized were after the World War, so in the 60s, 70s, 1960s, 1970s. These are examples from the Netherlands. This is in Leeuwarden in the north, and these are examples from Amsterdam. And here there was a very clear separation of functions. You see here there are like housing blocks, but for instance, the traffic is somewhere else. And there's car traffic on the one side, and there is pedestrian traffic somewhere here. So everything was separated. And you see already a little bit, so it takes, of course, you can build very dense with high-rise buildings, but it has also a certain inefficiency because everything is separated, everything needs space, and there are no interactions anymore. And that's a problem also in the actual urbanism, that we tend to treat things in a separate way. So everyone is talking today about climate change. It's a very important subject. I think maybe the most important, but it's not the only theme. And this is an image, a futuristic image for Paris by a Belgian architect, Calbo, for Paris. And he says, yeah, we should do everything completely different. So this is the historic center of Paris. I believe even it's like a picture taken from the Notre Dame. So really historic center. And he says, well, we need to build like these towers, these strange towers, to have more space, more fresh air, etc. But I mean, there are other themes in this city center. So for me, for instance, I know that this would not be, this is not Paris anymore. So this historical structure of Paris, this charm of the city is also important. It's not only about making everything green. And it's very interesting in this picture. You see still there are lots of cars here, parking lots, streets. That's are things which he didn't treat. So I think maybe an important thing is always that urbanism is about everything. And of course, climate change or other themes are important, become more important today, but as an urbanist, you should always think about all interests. Another thing is also, this is a tendency in all countries, I think. So there are investors, and they, of course, they want to gain money by urbanism. But urbanism, there's lots of money going on. So what they do is like, they make large-scale developments, and they're a little bit lazy, so they copy-paste everything. So you see here, the blocks are all the same. You continue, like, make the same things. It's also about scale. At the end, you have immense buildings. I showed you the other district in Kiev, which still has a certain human scale, but there are other developments which have a scale which maybe is not so attractive anymore. But that's a general challenge in urbanism. And the interesting thing is, if we talk about new urbanism, so what should we do in the future? You always think we are coming further and further, but new urbanism is almost like old urbanism. This is a picture from Josef Stüben. That's a German architect who wrote a book, Der Städtebau, the urbanism. And he writes about this project in Chicago, where before originally there was a district. It was the Park Boulevard district, which was like this, like small houses. Yes, this grid of housing streets. And then they made in the 60s or 70s, they made this large scale housing development. And what's very interesting is that they now it didn't work, and etc. And the new architects, they made a new plan for it. It's done by Skidmore, Owens and Merrill. It's one of the largest architectural offices from Chicago. And you see here, it's the same as it was originally. So it's going back to what we had before the Second World War. And that's something I think is very interesting, because we found out as new urbanism, we need these synergies again, because they help us so much to solve different problems and not about separation. And that's, I think it's a very interesting fact that we have to think better and to get these synergies again. I don't want to talk about Swiss urbanism, but I want to talk about Ukrainian urbanism. And yes, I have my office already since 12 years, and a colleague of mine lived in Vinica in Ukraine for 5 years, and that's why we also have this relation with Ukraine. And one of the projects we helped with is the urban development of the city of Vinica. And it started, well, not we, but it started with a political vision for the city of Vinica before we started to make the urban plan. That's this image you see here on the left, Vinica 2020. And there were some important issues like efficiency, especially cost efficiency, because the city was not really rich, so they didn't have money to build lots of new infrastructure. They wanted to have a compact city, also a way to make the things more efficient, but also to have more innovation, because if you build compact, you have more people we meet, and it helps innovation. And then we have the question of comfort, to be a city where people feel well, improve transport systems, for instance. So really the idea to have a comfortable, innovative European city. That was the political vision. And at the same time, Vinica was the city where the city of Zurich had an exchange with the old trams of Zurich. You see them here. They were very famous in Zurich, so it was not just throw them away somewhere, but it was really for Zurich. It was important to find a city which would really to this value of the trams would respect it. And then they found Vinica to do this exchange. And so there are lots of trams from Zurich now in Vinica. And of course, the capacity of the tram network grew enormously. And so there was this question also to use these opportunities. What can we do with these extra trams we have now? And then, as usually in Ukraine, there's a general plan created by a central institute, a Diplomista, I think, in Kiev. And they made a general plan for Vinica. And this is a schematical plan on the left below, a schematical image of how this general plan, of what this general plan proposed. And you see here, they have developments on the city edges everywhere. But if you have developments on the city edges, you need more infrastructure. So you need, for instance, here a new ring road. You need several bridges, new bridges. There is this river, the Southern Bach River. You need 3 more bridges. There is a railway. You need also bridges over the railways. And bridges are very expensive. And so the city council, they were looking like, this is not what we can't afford it. It's too expensive. So they were looking for a possibility. How can we do it better? And it's also that we have this tram network in this picture. Oh, excuse me. In this picture here above, you see the existing tram network. And you see here, the general plan doesn't react to it. It doesn't use the opportunities with all these new trams. So the city council was not happy with it, and that's why my colleague worked then at the government in Vinica, and they looked for a possibility to do it in a different way. And that's when he contacted me, and then we said, maybe we can, there is already this exchange with the trams, and maybe we can do also an exchange with the urban planning project. So we found financial support by the Swiss Confederation, and we started working on it. We did it always together in a team with people from the city council, with the community. There's a group of planners, so we did it always together with everyone involved. The first thing we did was an analysis of the city, and then we found out, and that is very interesting, that within this, you saw the other picture, but within this existing dense area, there's lots of possibility for growth, for development. There are lots of areas which are empty today or not used, or buildings which aren't used anymore. So, and at the same time, all the centers like markets, important schools, city centers, district centers, they were all concentrated in this existing dense area. So we were thinking, yes, why not use these potentials to develop the city? And on the other hand, you see also there are districts here more on the sides. We called it the hilly districts because they were in the hills of Vidica, with a lower density and which are very green as well, but which are not so well connected. There are not so many roads to the city center. And that's why we started making some guidelines, development guidelines. It's like the goal or the objective for the city, so which direction we want to go. And we started, of course, with the existing qualities which exist everywhere. And in Vinica, it was especially this green and blue structure of rivers, of creeks, small rivers, and they are green today, and they're very beautiful. But also, of course, historical sites, historical centers. And then the second thing was we don't want that our city is expanding too much because it's too expensive. So we had like the idea of having a green boundary around the city to keep it compact. And then the major idea was this idea of a city corso as a dynamic backbone for the city, where all the dense areas are connected, but also all the centers and markets, etc., are connected. We have also, of course, these hilly districts, which we think it's nice that we have that as well. We have also these green, low density housing districts. Then we have, of course, other connections, roads, which are important, and different centers. So that was a little bit our development guideline for Vidica. We did also several, scenarios. We had like this basic scenario of having this corso idea, we said, in the center of the city, connecting the dense areas. And we were thinking, yes, what would happen, because you never know the future, what would happen if someone really wants to invest, a big investment somewhere? We need space, a big space, and that you will not find in the central part, but maybe on the edges. And we try to see what happens if we go to the north. There are possibilities for construction. Then we will extend the existing tram line to the north, and it would work as well within this corso idea. But it can also extend to the east. Of course, then we need to build a bridge over the railroad, but that's it. Or we can like have extensions on different sides, but that would work as well. We have to extend our tram network in that way. So in this way, we can also be prepared when something unexpected would happen. This is the vision we made. So always make an image which can inspire, which is three-dimensional. And you see here as well the open space, the public space, as a starting point for this development project. We had everything also in plan, more in detail, to know exactly where we can develop or where not, and which area has more priority, should be first, and which area should be later. We always checked it also in detail, so it's about this cross-scale planning. So we had the public transport network for the whole city, but we had to check also some difficult crossings, difficult links in the public transport network. We had to find out if it really works. We made a comparison between the general plan, our strategic plan, and you see here also, okay, population is the same thing, but especially new infrastructure. We need much less new infrastructure. So in the general plan, there was 77 kilometers of new roads. We only have 5. They have 5 bridges. We only need 1 extra bridge. So it was much cheaper, and that shows us a little bit, if you think a little bit more in a integral way, you can also save lots of investments and lots of money. I show you some pictures. Urbanism is at the end also something about realization. We don't do it ourselves, but based on the plan, an urbanism plan will also be realized in the course of time. So these are first realizations, and that shows us also a little bit how important it is to check already in the urbanism phase if it's really realistic or not what you're proposing. So here, for instance, there's the Soborna Street, which was already redesigned 1 year after we finished our project. There are new tram lines constructed or renewed. Another project which was done a couple of years later was the project of the Kochubinskaya Street, which connects the city center to the railway station. We organized an open process, a sort of test study, we called it, with different teams. You see here the process. And that's what I talked also about. Urbanism is always about dialogue, it's about teamwork, you should work together. But it's also, it can also be nice, you know, you meet each other, and it's not only about working, it's also about having fun. In this project, we also did lots of tests already. I think it's also very interesting. This is the central, major square in Vinica. It was bombed by these coward Russians, exactly this square. And we tested it because it was, you see here, there's lots of traffic space. And we saw that it's a very nice square, of course. And why can we use it better? So we made tests, we made exhibitions, or they made exhibitions, also to show, to talk about the people. Everything was done in public, and that makes it also very interesting. There are also further realized projects like revaluation of an existing street, also with the tram line, as you see on these pictures. There are also other things, not only about tram lines, but also about social housing. There was this Podilja district in Vinica where we wanted to densify because there is a tram line. And now they finished a social housing project there. Public space, of course. Another are these creeks or small rivers. There's now a project of a revaluation of these green areas. And now I come to the war, and it's also about refugee strategy. So there are lots of refugees coming to Vinica. And the first idea was, of course, this picture on the left with like using these areas on the city edge for the refugees. But then people said, yeah, but it's a little bit a pity because the refugees, they need to be in the city as well. Not put them somewhere else where no one sees them and no one contacts them, but integrate them in the city. And this is exactly the Corso idea we had. And then you see also, obviously this Corso idea is really something which is very resilient or very robust. You can really use it with also unexpected developments. So maybe as a conclusion, my 45 minutes are over. So urbanism is very broad, it's very diverse, it affects everyone, and that's why I think it's very interesting. It's also very important, of course. We start urbanism always with this coherent, connected open space, as you see here on this picture of the Vinica strategy. What I showed you as well is that I think new urbanism is not about futuristic images. It's more interesting to show back what we did and which structures or what cities survived or what kind of urban forms survived and still work well. That's also a theme. Consider all issues, and especially now there are some trends about climate change, which is very important to consider, but always consider everything. I think we're talking about reconstruction, of course. And that's where we, when I worked with my colleagues in Ukraine, I think you should, the qualities in the Ukrainian cities, they exist and they still exist, even if they are bombed. There are qualities and you should start with them. And I think it's, don't look too much to Swiss proposals or Dutch developments, but start at your own, at your own culture. I think also no out of place utopias, as I've showed you this example of Paris, but consider especially your own context. It's about landscape, the culture, economic structure, also financial means. It's very important to consider that as well. I think also the many cities in Ukraine, which before the war started, well, the war started already in 2014, but before the Russians invaded, there were already many cities working on their city development, that these plannings exist, and try to work with these existing plannings. And I think something which makes, which I think is very nice about urbanism is that you have to talk a lot with people and you have to make nice images, and that makes the work very, very interesting. I hope it worked well. I hope there weren't, you had a calm and safe, you had a calm and safe place. And we have, for me, we have some 10, 15 minutes left for questions or remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. I will ask our audience, do you have questions? Якщо у вас є питання, будь ласка, або задавайте їх голос, можете підняти руку, я включу вам звук, або можете самі включити собі звук, або напишіть їх в чаті. Будемо раді всім вашим запитанням. У вас є така унікальна можливість запитати Хана щось. Чи є речі? Бачу от руку. Марія, да, тобі слово.
May I ask about the ways of solving problem of abandoned and unfinished buildings?
I didn't very well understand the question. Can you repeat?
Задай його, будь ласка, українською, давай спробуємо, можливо, наші перекладачки спробують нам перекласти. Або я перекладу.
Хочу запитати про закинуті будівлі.
Як вирішувати це питання, чи що?
Так.
Yes, that was in Vinica. That was one thing which we saw, that that there are many buildings which are not used, really abandoned. Already in Vinica, when it was not yet the war, and that was also the place where we found out where we can have the refugees to create other functions. And that's maybe also a question. So these buildings, often that's not housing buildings. It's like in this case in Vinica, there were like educational buildings from the university, which were not used anymore. And they are now doing projects or they did already, to reconstruct them in housing, in housing. I don't know if you had, if that it was your question. Maybe you have something specific also to about these abandoned buildings.
Not specific, but I'm interested in searching historical buildings or abandoned buildings and the way of how the way of their functions in the society, and how urbanism can help to make them better or to reconstruct the space.
Yeah. Yes, I think generally also if we talk about this climate change, so the existing buildings, if they are abandoned or not, they play a central role. So today there in Switzerland there's an enormous discussion of constructing everything new, And you know, the buildings in Switzerland aren't even bombed, but they destroy them and then they build something new. And that's something which is very, we're asking questions about if it's right, because it needs lots of energy to build something new. And that's why generally I think this is a central main theme, main issue about urbanism, that you use the existing, everything that exists, which is already constructed, if it's historical or just abandoned, we should reuse it. And that was also the idea of this refugees strategy in Vinica, to reuse the buildings instead of making something completely new. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have Mikhailo.
Thank you for this detailed presentation. And I have as a citizen of Ukraine, a question. Well, can you name the main problem of small towns in Ukraine?
Interesting that you say there's the problem, but I think it's also a chance. Like, I don't know what small is. Vinica, for me, it's like middle-sized. It's not like Kiev, but it's also not like a small town. And that's maybe also more on a regional scale if we talk about small towns. But I would say that these smaller towns, they can also be very, very successful, because it's the quality of living, for instance, is often quite high, because you're in the middle of nature, or in the middle of agricultural land. So, for instance, Vinica is it's really very attractive. I think even because it's smaller. But of course, you need if you want to really have like city life, you need also a certain density or a certain dimension of a city, so that it can have also an economic power. But I think at the end it's about a whole region. So not every city should be large. We need also the smaller cities, and so that smaller cities have other economic advantages and another profile as larger cities. And some people like also to live in a smaller city as in a large city. So I think it's more about a regional planning, but we should not indeed forget also about small towns or villages.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Alina.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, Han, I'd like to say thank you for such an interesting and inspiring lecture. And my question is about villages, because you said don't forget about the villages, because villages need help. So I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about your favorite project you ever done in a village? Maybe just a little bit, just to have a better understanding of what can be done in villages and in other smaller areas.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So when I started in Switzerland, I'm originally from the Netherlands. So I didn't have so much contact in Switzerland in the beginning. And so the only, so in the cities in Switzerland, the architects, they were already known. So they worked only with their own architects. It was very difficult for me to find interesting assignments and projects. So I only had projects in villages. I started especially in the villages, and I think for me it was a very good way to start. Maybe the situation in Swiss villages are a little bit different as in Ukrainian villages, but the one thing which is interesting in villages is it's relatively compact. You have everything the distances are short. And that is something where you can start with. It's really an advantage. You don't need so much infrastructure so that it works well. You don't need tram lines. You only need maybe a small bus to start with. I think in villages, the main thing is also about the historic development or the local economy. I think that is also where we should start generally, also in cities, but to regard things more in a local way. To see that in a village can work for itself. It has its own production, has its own agriculture, for instance. And I think that could also help people it's more like a cooperative, you know, that villages, you help each other, you can profit from each other. And maybe one theme which is important that it really works, that it's connected with the rest of the country. So I think that's the main, for me, for really small towns or small villages, you can make a very good starting point, a very good place to live, to work. But it doesn't work until you connect it well with the rest of the country. So I think that is maybe the main challenge about small settlements, the connection with the rest of the country.
Thank you.
Maybe also if we talk about villages or small towns, it's always also about synergies again. So you have to look where you can profit. So in a village, for instance, there may be not so many people, but if you have a bus stop, for instance, then there are people waiting, and you can have a certain density. You have commercial functions. So it's also about always looking for these interactions which can help to make villages more attractive.
Thank you so much. I think I saw a question from Volodymyr. Yes or no?
Алло. Ви бачите мене, так?
Так.
Або я себе не бачу. Дякую, дуже цікава сьогодні лекція, така практична. У мене питання буде пов'язане на прикладі Вінниці. Ми бачимо, що практично такі обласні города і невеликі города на сьогодні мають містобудівну документацію, розроблені нашими державними інститутами, які пройшли експертизу і мають статус закону, затверджений сесією відповідними інститутами. На сьогодні ваш проєкт має більше концептуальні, і як ці проєкти сьогодні, які ви розробляють ваші колеги, потім співпадають з тими генеральними планами, які, от як ви показали напередодні, щодо їх спільне опрацювання, як вони між собою відображають, і як потім автори попередніх робіт з вами чи дружать, чи у вас є конфронтація та інше. Дякую.
Thank you. It's a good question, and it shows exactly a little bit what urbanism is about. It's indeed, as you said, so we started it more like a concept. Because if you start like with the general plan and you are only thinking about what density we need, where are the roads, then you will have like an enormous, you have a completely different project. So we started in another way. We started with what are the qualities of the city, what are the special challenges. And so maybe we made a concept, and that's like this sketch. It's always a question how legal something is. Of course, the city council, they approved it. They wanted to follow this, but it's not yet a general plan. And that was also the idea of the city council, to say we put like a period before we make the general plan. We stop the general plan. Now we first make a concept for the city, like a courageous vision, and then at the end we adapt our general plan. I don't know. I must admit, I don't know if it's now the general plan is adapted or not. But that was the idea, to have like first the vision and then adapt or make a new general plan on the based on this vision. We didn't have conflicts with Dipremisto, but it was, I think, a complete other way of thinking. So they were like, this was also their job to show, okay, we have so much growth, so we need so much hectares of land for new developments. That was the way they were thinking, but they weren't thinking in qualities or something. So that was that's in Switzerland is exactly the same thing. Usually they also they started with a general plan. They started with rules. But if you don't know what you want, then you can't have the right rules to make. So in Switzerland, it's a little bit the same thing, that we propose to do something in between. So we have growth, then we first want to know what is the vision we are looking for, and then we settle a legal plan. But that's exactly a good question. I think that this is also the nice part, I think, about urban development.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Karina.
My question, should urban planning solve today's challenges, or at the same time looking ahead? And in the reconstruction of Ukraine, we need to introduce new technologies into everyday life as soon as it's possible, or development is something like step by step?
Mm-hmm. I would rather say step by step, or at least the thing is always, that has always been, it was also after the Second World War, there are some kind of big trends and big technical developments. At that time, it was, for instance, the cars, which were developed a lot. But if you only regard one thing, and it's often a little bit like this, it's one thing you think it will solve everything, but at the end it's very broad. It has much more other things, and even also technical inventions that can help. I think you should always think about these new developments, but I personally always see that I have to step on the brakes a little bit, because there are lots of people who want to, let me do everything new, completely different as before. Then I also have to no. Pay attention. There are also other aspects, and I rather try to look back. So if something survived 100 years, for instance, these building edges I showed, that's something which still exists and still works very well, then I think that's something which always will work well. Something which existed already 100 years ago and it still works well, for instance, a tram line, or I don't know what, or boulevard, it still works. So continue working also on these things. And at the end, it's also about, the thing is, lots of things, technical things are more in detail. So maybe you will need more, I don't know, places to park your car, or you need like more electricity for your electric car. But that's all details, not about the width of a boulevard. So I think you should always think about these new opportunities, new chances, new challenges, but always keep the existing structures in mind. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Sergey, and I think it's going to be okay. And from Irina, it's going to be 2 last questions because we need to let him go as a schedule. Thank you so much, Sergey.
Так, моє запитання. У нас невеличке місто, і дуже важко йде міськвлада на взагалі розуміння принципів урбаністики, на верховенство пішохода. В нас постійно ДТП з цього приводу. Чи можливо застосувати так званий тактичний урбанізм, якщо я правильно це вимовляю, коли люди самі малюють собі ті ж дороги, там велодоріжки, роблять це знизу, тобто не міськвлада спускає, а саме коли це знизу. Чи треба це робити, чи треба боротися з міськвладою там якимись іншими методами? Це моє запитання.
Thank you for the question. Yes, of course. Because before you start to redesign a road, it's very expensive. And you saw also in this example of Vinica that they cut also a street. They made it smaller, and there was a street connection which was cutted because it's not needed. And these are also things you can do very quickly, and you should also do it. It's sometimes it's very easy, and especially because it's too expensive to do everything completely new. So I think you should certainly start with it. And then at the same time, you saw also in the Vinica example, so they have like this tactical urbanism with small interventions, but at the same time, there is like this vision where we want to go. So you don't just create somewhere a new bicycle track because from A to B, but no one uses it. So it's also always good to have like this vision or an idea on what direction we have to go. And then if you do an intervention, it's also coherent with the whole city or with different other considerations. So I think that's important to have also this bigger vision in mind if you're doing also temporary things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the last question from Irina, please.
Підскажіть, будь ласка, якщо от є невелике місто і в умовах воєнного стану дуже обмежений фінансовий ресурс, та взагалі майже всі ресурси обмежені. І коли ми намагаємося з одного боку ліквідувати ті пошкодження, які були завдані військовою агресією, елементарне там скління вікон та перекрити дах, але в той же час нам треба якось не забувати про загальний напрямок і також вкладати кошти, вкладати сили та розвиватися в урбаністичному, загальноміському такому, якісь великі об'єкти і проекти. От як знайти той баланс, щоб це не було в ущерб містянам, так, як щоб далі і відновлювати, але в той же час це не шкодило майбутньому, щоб ми не зациклились на малому.
Yes, it's a little bit also from the question before. So you need to repair things quickly. Yeah? So there are things which need to be repaired. That doesn't make the urban development more difficult or something. So I think it's just about surviving. But the other thing is then, at the moment, you also have to think about, for instance, repairing a road, or this building, it's damaged, very damaged. Do we destroy it, or can we reuse it? And that's exactly what your question is about: is balance. Do we need to think in a new way, or shall we just reconstruct? I don't know, there will come a time where we really have to think about this. So what balance we need. At least I think maybe the small towns, also many small towns, but it's the same thing also in Switzerland. The small towns, they don't have lots of budget and lots of money. So it's really step by step. You don't also need, like in Vinica, this big idea in the beginning. You can also start, indeed in Vinica, we started also only at the station area where someone wanted to construct something. Is it possible or not? And then we started also with small interventions. And then we had the luck that we had a connection and relations and we could make this project. But I think you can also start with smaller things. And at the end, also you can integrate things which you're renewing on smaller scale. You can integrate it at the end also in an overall concept. But it's always this balance which we need to have in mind, as you said.
Thank you so much for the answers. Thank you, Han, for you being with us today for this lecture. This was incredibly interesting, and I think it will be very important for our goals from our project and for everyone who had and who will have possibility to listen to this lecture while we are thinking what we will do with our cities tomorrow and today. Thank you so much for joining our project.
Thank you too. Thank you for your attention. And I've sent you also the presentation, so you can hand it out if someone is interested. To have also these, I wrote all these names of the books. If someone likes it, then you can hand it out if you want. It's no problem.
Thank you so much. Якщо хтось захоче побачити цю презентацію, будь ласка, напишіть нам. Я написала в чаті і на соціальній мережі. Будемо раді бачити. Підписуйтесь, контактуйте. Я нагадаю вам, що це був Хан Ван де Ветерінг. Він сьогодні провів нашу вже другу відкриту лекцію онлайн-курсу з урбаністики. Ми будемо раді бачити вас на наступних лекціях. Доєднуйтеся і давайте разом думати про майбутнє українських міст. Дякуємо вам всім, що сьогодні в цей непростий вечір були разом з нами. Дякуємо і хорошого вам вечора.